What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the top 3 best warrior builds in Path of Exile 2 0.3 update. So in this guide I will give you a quick overview of each setup, then I will explain what skills and upgrades should you focus on, then as well we'll see what is the best gear and how to get it, and then finally we will go over the passive skill tree, the stats, the skill rotations, and even what Atlas passive should you use, so we would be able to get the highest damage possible and much more. And remember, if you want to try any of these builds out, then check my links in the description. And before we continue, thanks to U4GM. They are a pro website that provides POE2 services like cheap currency, then even to trade all types of quality items and gems and much more. They have also more than 20,000 positive comments on Trustpilot, and this website is really worth a try. So make sure to use my discount code KATE for extra 6% off. This setup is all about turning your warrior into a walking volcano by scaling ignite from massive slams and leaving entire packs of enemies burning in your footsteps. If you ever wanted a build that feels heavy, brutal and explosive all at once, then this is it. The heart of this build comes from 3 key skills: Volcanic Fissure, the Forge Hammer and the Stampede. Volcanic Fissure splits the ground open in a wave of lava, then the Forge Hammer lands a crashing blow that ignites even the tankiest targets, and Stampede finishes off by making every step you take rip the battlefield apart. Together, they will give you an unmatched clear speed and boss damage that melts targets. What makes the build shine is setting enemies on fire. Because Ignite scales up the size of your hit, every massive slam you land will translate into a burn that continues to deal damage for several seconds. That means your Forge Hammer or the Volcanic Fissure is just not one hit. It essentially gets stretched over several times, and the bigger impact, the bigger the burn. The bosses that might usually take ages to grind down will start melting away as you rotate through the skills. And another important thing to know is that while many melee builds were slowed down by the armor explosion nerf this patch, the Fire Warmbringer is still OP. Ignite scaling was not affected by those changes, which makes the setup stand out as most consistent and rewarding warrior build in the game right now. It's super strong for mapping, devastating for bosses, and it feels smooth for the leveling all the way into the red maps. So let's break down the skill gems. And your main clearing tool is the Stampede. And honestly, this is one of the most fun melee skills in Path of Exile 2. Every step you take will proc fissures under your feet, and once you've linked it with the supports like the Crater and the branching fissures, it turns into a chain reaction of eruptions that wipe out monsters without you even needing to stop moving. The mapping feels incredible with this skill, because you're literally killing while stripping through the zones. For single target you've got a rotation that feels deliberate and powerful, and against rares or bosses you will start with Infernal Cry if you have access to it, because that weakens enemies and primes them for explosions. Then you slam them with the Forge Hammer, following up by the Volcanic Fissure, and finally you pop Ancestral Cry to boost your exerted attacks. From there we transition into the Stampede until the targets burn down. If you don't have the Ancestral Cry yet, then you can simply rely on the Infernal Cry to fill that slot, and you will see huge ignite damage rolling over time. Especially for tanky bosses, dropping a war banner before you start your rotation will add that extra push you need. And one quick tip here, keep your war banner at a low level. Leveling it up increases dexterity requirements without giving you much more power, so you actually save yourself some stat headaches by leaving it underleveled. It's still incredibly effective, but you don't need to overcommit points into dexterity just to keep it online. Then for supports, the first place that you want to invest your quality is the Stampede, since that's your main clearing skill and it scales beautifully with the early investment. When it comes to the Jevels, there are 2 things to look out for. The new unique The Jevel Heart of the Will is a game changer by giving you both maximum life on a kill and extra fire damage. Then for rare Jevels, aim for stats like the added rage on a hit, increased damage against enemies with the broken armor, and even the block chance for survival. These will scale your damage while also shoring up defenses, which is the perfect balance for a melee fire build. Then next up we have the passive tree, and you want to start at this section and move into the clusters that emphasize melee damage, slam effectiveness and the Warcry synergies, since Ignite is our main damage source, so we prioritize the fire multipliers and burning damage nodes, making sure that every big hit we land translates into the sustained burning. Then physical to elemental conversion nodes are also key here, since they let us turn the raw strength into devastating fire output. Defenses are built directly into the progression, so maximum life scaling is everywhere, combined with strong investments into into the armor and endurance charges. Endurance charges aren't just for defenses, they also tie into the Warbringer synergies and empower your exerted attacks. This keeps you both tanky enough to stay in the melee range and consistent enough to deliver empowered blows every few seconds. The Warcry nodes are another cornerstone of the tree. The cooldown reduction and exerted attack bonus are critical, since our whole single target rotation relies on weaving the Warcry into the slams. By reducing cooldowns and increasing their effect, we make sure that our infernal and ancestral cries are always ready when we need them. There's also room here for scaling AoV, which feels fantastic with the skills like the Volcanic fissure. Bigger coverage here mean faster map clearing, but it also ensures that your slams reliably ignite every enemy in a pack. The next up we have gear, and first and foremost you wanna cap your resistances. The fire, cold and lightning will need to hit at least 75% mark, because without it you're going to get deleted in the red maps. For your main weapon hand you wanna aim for the Soul and Maul. It is the perfect two-handed base for scaling those big ignite triggering hits. Then helmets like the Mask Great Helm, and body armor like the Warlord Kuri Russ will provide the strength, spirit and resistances that you need, while the Bulwark Greaves will round out your defenses. Then for your offhand, the Swell and Shield is absolutely critical. It adds survivability, the block chance, and synergizes perfectly with defensive layers of this build. Then for rings we should get the Amethyst ring for resistances and damage scaling. Then for gloves, get the Valmits and the Rawhide belt to provide that extra melee scaling, fire damage and the maximum life. Then on the amulet slot you wanna get the gold amulet, and make sure that you've got at least plus 35 spirit summer on your gear, so either way here or on your body armor. This one is required if you want your build to run smoothly. Then for affixes you wanna prioritize physical damage converted to fire, added fire damage, melee skill scaling, maximum life and the strength. On top of that, you will want the Soul Core of the Deity rune on your gear and iron runes on your weapons. These will push your damage into overdrive, while keeping the defense very high. And finally, don't neglect the Jevels. At the heart of the Vel Jevel is the best in slot for sustain and the fire scaling, but rare Jevels with the rage on hit, fire multipliers and the block chance are just as valuable for rounding out your setup. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. The flow is straightforward but incredibly satisfying. For clearing, you will rely almost entirely on the Stampede. Every footstep procs the fissures that ripple through the packs, and once you've got your supports online, you're basically erasing screens just by moving. And then for stragglers or tough rares, you can use the Forge Hammer or the Volcanic Fissure to finish them off. Then for single target, you will shift into a very controlled rotation. If you got Ancestral Cry, then your opener is Infernal Cry to weaken the enemies, followed by the Forge Hammer, then the Volcanic Fissure, then the Ancestral Cry to empower your extended attacks, and after that it's all about the Stampede, until the target is dead. However, on the other hand, if you don't have that Ancestral Cry yet, then just stick with the Infernal Cry and the rotation still works. And then lastly, a quick tip. When you're facing especially tanky bosses, dropping a War Banner before you start will add a serious DPS boost. This build is super unique because instead of avoiding damage, we're actually embracing it. As the more damage we receive, the faster the enemies will melt. The core of this setup revolves around a unique helmet called the Crowd of the Pale King. Without it, the entire concept doesn't work, because this helmet takes every incoming hit and converts it into the Thorns damage, while also triggering effects like the Barbs and the Quill Burst. These not only deal additional retaliation damage, but also give the build that satisfying visual identity. So spikes are erupting, bursts of the barbs are flying out, and enemies are endlessly being punished for trying to hurt you. If you are playing in SSF, then you're going to want to hold off until you find this helmet, but in the trade leagues, it's your absolute top priority. Then another key piece that boosts this build is the Warbringer's Anvil's Fate mechanic. Traditionally, one of the biggest hurdles for the tanky builds is the clanky downtime when the armor breaks, by leaving you exposed, but with the Anvil's Fate that entire friction point is removed, so suddenly, maintaining stacks of the Scavenge plating is effortless. Your defenses will never collapse, and your retaliation damage just keeps working 24/7. So let's take a look at our skill gems. At the center we got the Thorn Skin, and we're using both the Thorn Skin 1 and the Thorn Skin 2, depending on how much spirit you have available. You need to think of the Thorn Skin as your retaliation aura. It needs to be up at all times, and your job is to manage the spirit so you can keep it active consistently. If you invested into additional spirit rolls on your gear, then you can stack multiple Thorn Skins together, which will feel amazing because you're essentially wrapping yourself in a double coat of spikes. The more uptime, the more damage monsters will deal to themselves by just hitting you. For endurance and survivability, we rely heavily on the magma barrier, which interacts with the charge regulation to keep endurance charges flowing. And while we are speaking about the endurance charges, they're huge here, because they scale your mitigation and by extension your Thorns damage. To complement this, Resonating Shield is an occasional button press that might not feel that flashy, but it's deceptively strong. Hitting it regularly while mapping will keep your endurance charges topped off and make you feel unstoppable. Defensively, your setup revolves around the Scavenge Plating, Magma Barrier and Resonating Shield, which are all linked with supports that extend duration, reduce cooldowns, or even boost armor scaling. And this is where you see how your defense literally becomes offense. The longer your plating and the barriers stay active, the more enemies beat themselves to death by trying to get through. And then on the offensive side, you're not relying solely on retaliation. Skills like the Rapid Assault and the Rake are slotted in to give us active melee presence. These aren't your main damage dealers, but they will keep the pressure up and ensure that the enemies are constantly pulled in your retaliation field. And lastly, for utility skills, we got the Fortifying Cry, which not only keeps you alive but directly scales Thorn, because increased mitigation will equal the stronger retaliation. With a cooldown recovery linked, you can keep this almost permanently. Then Disengage is your emergency tool. It's a quick reposition button that doesn't get used often, but it feels OP in those moments where you need to dodge a telegraphed boss slam. Then now let's take a look at the passive tree. The first cornerstone is the Iron Reflexes, and it's essential. By converting evasion into armor, it takes stats that normally would not scale retaliation and transforms them into fuel for your Thorns. When you're stacking evasion on the rings, amulets and the gauntlet, the Iron Reflexes will take all of that and skyrocket your armor. This result is not just durability, but also raw damage output, since our retaliation values are based on how much armor you can stack. From there we go into the three main priorities. The first one is the raw defense. You're picking up clusters for the maximum life, armor scaling and endurance charge generation. These nodes give you the staying power to survive constant hits, which is the lifeblood of a Thorns build. If you are not tanky enough to stay in the thick of a combat, then your retaliation never gets the chance to work. Then the second focus is on retaliation scaling itself. The tree will include several passives that boost reflect damage, increase the effect of Thorns and synergize with the physical scaling. Unlike crit focus builds that chase multipliers, this one leans into the consistency. Every hit you take will become guaranteed damage output, and that output will multiply into packs where the monsters swing rapidly. And then finally, our last focus is on utility and sustain. Regeneration nodes, block recovery and the cooldown efficiency are all picked along the way. These will give you fluidity to keep your Warcry's barriers and the Thorn skins active without the downtime. It means that you're never caught waiting for a cooldown to cycle or left exposed without your defenses. Next up is the gear, and the first rule of gearing is to upgrade your Thorns gear at the start of every level bracket. The Thorns damage doubles at every stage, and if you neglect upgrades, then you will feel yourself falling behind quickly. So stay on top of it, and your damage will always feel smooth. The best in slot shield is the China Box Pillar. This thing takes your retaliation damage to ridiculous heights, especially when paired with a Scavenge Plating. If you can get a corrupted version with the Thorns damage, then that's the best in slot. Then your spear does not need to deal DPS directly. Instead, look for modifiers that boost Thorns indirectly. So things like gain percentage of damage as extra damage, and sockets for the Sakaval's Rune of the Sky. Then for boots, the Briar Patch is your target, ideally with 2 sockets and a corruption for the high movement speed. Then the body armor should be in a high armor base, with maximum life and resistances. You can go for spirit rolls if you want, but remember that usually it will cost you a maximum life roll, so the trade-off is up to you. Then for amulet, the solar amulet is best in slot. You want one with another spirit roll, maximum life, percentage increased maximum life, and capped resistances. Then our belt should carry a high physical Thorns roll, a high armor base, maximum life and resistances. Then on gloves and rings you wanna fill it with the life, capped resistances, and ideally evasion to scale armor through the Iron Reflexes. And then anoint is our last thing. If you are on a budget, then go with defensive reflexes for a cheap black anoint. But if you got more to invest, then the Molten Being is a great mix of offense and defense. And then finally, for pure damage, the anoint called Cook will bring extra punch. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. The rotation is simple, smooth and incredibly satisfying. You wanna keep the Thorn skin active at all times, because that's your bread and butter and you never want to be caught without it. You'll want to cycle Magma Barrier and the Resonating Shield to keep endurance charges flowing, and then you can drop the Scavenge Plating whenever it's ready, because it multiplies your retaliation damage by a huge amount. Then for offense, you weave in Rapid Assaults and the Rake to keep enemies engaged. They're not going to be the star of the show, but they will keep the pressure on the packs and bosses, while your Thorns do the real work. Then use Fortifying Cry on the cooldown for survivability and retaliation scaling, and keep Disengage in your back pocket for emergencies. When you're mapping, the playstyle is almost brainless in the best way, so you charge into the backs, your Thorn skins will trigger, enemies will slam into you, and they will instantly explode from their own damage. In the dense content like Delirium or Legion, it feels incredible, because the more enemies swarm you, the faster the screen clears. And then when it comes to bosses, it's about patience. You're not trying to burst them down in seconds. Instead, you stay alive to keep your defensive layers rolling, and let the bosses bleed themselves dry. With the Crown of the Pale King and the Scavenge Plating scaling, they will fall shockingly fast, and you will feel completely godlike the entire time. This build has been surprising me with just how fun and strong it feels, that it has the perfect blend of tankiness, reliability, and insane DPS scaling into the endgame. The concept is very simple. You summon Shockwave totems, and those totems will do almost all the heavy lifting for your damage. You as the warrior just simply focus on setting the stage by creating fissures, applying the jagged ground, and stacking war cries or the banners to boost everything that the totems do. At any point you can drop 4 Shockwave totems, and from there destruction begins. The synergy between the Earthquake, Volcanic Fissure, and the Forge Hammer is what makes this setup feel so powerful. The Earthquake lays jagged ground, which amplifies the totem damage. Then Volcanic Fissure throws down fiery cracks that your totems can repeatedly detonate, and Forge Hammer provides an even heavier hitting version of that interaction for bosses, though it does require war cries to activate. The beauty of this build is its flexibility in the combat flow. If you are clearing maps, you're mostly relying on your Shockwave totems, letting them rip through the packs with their massive AoE pulses. If you need more damage for the tanky rares or the bosses, then you press Volcanic Fissure. If that's still not enough, then the Earthquake and the Forge Hammer will come online, stacking jagged ground and additional fissures for your totems to detonate. And on top of this, if you really want to push things over the edge, then you've got Infernal Cry, War Banner, and even the Southern as the last buffs to destroy anything standing in your way. So let's take a look at our skill gems. The goal during leveling is to go towards Ancestral Artiface as quickly as possible, while still grabbing some damage nodes to keep your pace comfortable. Once you've got Ancestral Artiface online, combine that with the First Ascendancy, Answered Call, and the Volcanic Fissure, and then you can transition into the full Shockwave totem setup. At that point, the build really starts to feel like it's coming online. Now there's also Rakiate's Flow. It's a rare and extremely expensive gem right now, but if you can somehow get your hands on one, then it provides an enormous damage boost against bosses. Think of it as a luxury addition. You don't need to succeed, but it's the best 10 slot if you get lucky. Then for the core links, your Shockwave totem is absolutely the start of the show. In a 6-link setup, it pairs with the Volcanic Fissure, the Forge Hammer, and the Earthquake. The 5th support gem is where the things get flexible. If you want smoother clears, then you can add something like the Slam support, or if you just want raw DPS boost, then go with the Heavy Swing or Execute too. And if you're leaning towards survivability, then Font of Blood is great because it provides Life Leech, which really shines if you're running the blood magic. Then as for the Fissure skills, remember this: the Forge Hammer is stronger than the Volcanic Fissure, but it comes with a cooldown and requires a war cry, and this makes it best reserved for bosses or tough rares. The Volcanic Fissure, meanwhile, is your reliable and spammable fissure maker for the maps and general encounters. You generally don't want to overlap the two. If the Forge Hammer is active, then avoid using the Volcanic Fissure at the same time, or you risk cutting into its effectiveness. Then Earthquake is a little different. You don't actually care about its damage directly. We are just using it for the jagged ground, which amplifies your totem damage. That means the support you link with the Earthquake should focus on AoV and duration rather than the raw DPS. Beyond that, there are some utility gems worth highlighting. Berserker is a fantastic damage booster, but it requires a bit of life regen management to use it comfortably. Then Scavenge Plating provides extra armor, but it only works if you get the Anvil's Weight Ascendancy node. And Ancestral Spirits is a sneaky good boost, though currently the prolonged duration does not increase its buff duration due to what seems like a bug, so hopefully that gets fixed soon. And in terms of weapon setups, you wanna run the Shockwave Totem and the Southern in weapon set 1, in Volcanic Fissure and the Forge Hammer in weapon set 2. This makes it easy to pivot between your core playstyle and your heavy hitting utility skills. Next up we have the passive tree, and it is made to do one thing extremely well, which is to scale Shockwave totem damage while making you super hard to kill. Your number one priority is Shanked, so get it as much as possible. It not only directly scales your life pool, but also opens the door for big Shanked scaling synergies later in the build. You of course want to grab dexterity and intelligence as needed, but only to meet the gem requirements, and then just stack strength all the way to the endgame. From there you focus on totem clusters like the Ironwood and the Ancestral Bond, by stacking every possible multiplier for the totem damage, attack speed and survivability. These notables will make your totems hit like a truck and last long enough to keep your uptime nearly 100%. You also heavily invest into the life and the energy shield hybrid scaling, which synergizes with the warrior's ascendancy and defenses. It's not just about having a huge life pool, it's about regenerating and mitigating the damage at the same time. This gives you room to stay on the front line while your totems do the work. Damage scaling comes primarily from the physical and AoV nodes. The AoV is specifically important. It doesn't just increase the raw numbers, it also expands the size of your shockwaves, making your cluster smoother and your boss fights feel more oppressive. We also want to invest a bit into the utility nodes for the mana sustain, so you're never stuck in an awkward downtime waiting for the recast. And don't forget about the jevels. You want to look for bonuses to the totem placement speed, armor, life regen, and ideally the flat strength. If you can corrupt into a 2% strength on a Jevel suffix, then that's the best in slot. Overall, the end result is a passive tree that gives you insane Shockwave totem scaling, while keeping your character tanky and comfortable in the thick of combat. Next we have gear, and this is the place where we transform the build from pretty good to absolutely godlike. The rule of thumb is to stack strength everywhere. Every single slot should ideally provide some strength that keeps you scaling damage and survivability together. The most important unique is the Constructing Command, which is a helmet that enables some extremely powerful passive nodes when rolled correctly, so make sure to get one with the max roll of 5 fewer enemies required to be surrounded. Then for weapons, your goal is to get a high physical DPS mace or a staff. The dream setup of course is getting a +6 to melee skills, with the perfect essence of the battle, while making sure that your suffixes are locked in. If you can eventually drop the reduced attribute requirements, then you can go all in on attack speed. Then gloves and boots are both massive crafting projects. You want double socketed bases with fractured strength, and then just keep on crafting it until you get good prefixes like life and armor. Use Essence of the Horror for the 100% socket effect, and aim for suffixes like the life regen and resistances. With omens you can push these even further. Then for the chest we should get the Ornate Plate, with the life regen implicit. You want to prioritize armor, life, and the armor applies to elemental modifier. Then amulet is by far the hardest slot, so you'll want the spirit, all attributes, flat or percentage strength, and the life. Getting plus melee skills is very rare, so settle for strong defenses or utility suffixes if needed. And then finally, our shield should stack life, armor, and the armor applies to elemental roll. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. Our rotation is straightforward but incredibly satisfying. You start by dropping up to 4 Shockwave totems in a group of monsters. That alone will clear most fights. If you need more damage, then add in Volcanic Fissure. If that's not enough, then hit the Earthquake to create jagged ground. For bosses or the super tanky rares, you want to switch to the Forge Hammer and pair it with the Infernal Cry for the massive burst. From there, the War Banner and even Southern are your final damage buttons to absolutely annihilate anything that dares to stand in your way. What makes this build so fun is that every layer feels impactful. Each kill that you press has a weight and a meaning. You're not just spamming one button endlessly, and because of your totems are doing most of the heavy lifting, so you're free to move, dodge and stay alive, without worrying about dropping your DPS uptime. And the end result is a build that feels aggressive, tanky and devastating all at once. No matter if you're mapping, bossing or farming endgame content, the Shockwave Totem Warrior build is the best in slot.